Welcome. This is a forum sponsored by the Greater Lynn Bar Association. And I once saw Ted Sorensen, who was the speechwriter for the Kennedy brothers, give a lesson on how to give a speech. And his key word was be brief. So as I was writing out a speech, I've been telling all the panel all week long, you gotta be brief, except for two, the Rabbi and Tanisha Sullivan's replacement. They can speak as long as they want. But as I was writing some remarks this morning, I said, my God, this is gonna take forever. So then I decided to pass them out. I figured that would be nice and efficient. Ted Grant, who's not a member of the Greater Lynn Bar Association, but has been a big aid to us, he vetoed the idea. He said, you gotta give a talk. So here we go. If you think the topic is timely, read the Metro section of today's Globe. The theme is to stop Jewish hate. That's the name of a campaign organized by Robert Kraft, Governor Maura Healey, Attorney General Andrea Campbell, and Mayor Michelle Wu. It combined with Jewish philanthropies to fight Jewish hate. This Globe article pointed out that there is a rise in anti-Semitic incidents and a nationwide jump in Jewish incidents in 2022. That's why we started this whole thing. We were originally going to do it in connection with Jews only, but we decided, I mean, there's so much prejudice going on, we'd spread it around, not the prejudice, but the hope. So Mayor Wu said the work of dismantling cannot be the work of the Jewish community alone. Mr. Kraft said, standing together with a diverse group of people is exactly what we need in America now. Although prejudice is a heavy topic, I encourage everyone who says anything, who speaks tonight, and most likely the judge is the best candidate, is to say something funny so we can, the whole night doesn't have to be. So before we go further, I'd like to thank some folks. First, Attorney Mary Ann Calnan. She's in the corner over there. She's the president of the Greater Lynn Bar Association. She's brilliant and she's funny and she makes meetings a pleasure to go to. And I said she was funny and brilliant, didn't I? Aside from learning something, it is actually fun to go to our Bar Association meetings. We have a lot of outstanding lawyers, but I want to recognize one for his outstanding service. We actually named an award after him last year. Attorney Loring Fluke, sitting right in the front row. He is just a dedicated soul, and he helps us all the time. His counterpart, another great contributor to the Greater Lynn Bar Association is former Judge Bert Conlon. He's continually giving us ideas, and we call him the Idea Man. His counterpart is Ted Grant, who is the Idea Man for the community. I want to thank Ted and Grant Communications and the Daily Item for their advice and input into this forum. Lynn is a very giving community. Loyalty and generosity are two of its hallmarks. So I want to thank especially a volunteer who's sitting in front of my sisters, Harry McCabe. If you ever need something done in Lynn, call Harry. Harry will get it done. And I'm going to suggest publicly right now, Harry, I've talked privately to some people about this, that we have a Harry McCabe night next year for you.
Nice.
Yeah. There's one other volunteer I want to thank, and that's Maria Carrasco. Where are you, Maria? There she is. She's right over there. She is another volunteer. If you call her, she'll come right out and help you, and she does a great job. She got us some spot. By the way, thank you, all of you, for being sponsors and coming to this event. I think we ended up with about 70 sponsors, and that's pretty good. So thank you. I want to thank Mayor Jared Nicholson. And the best thing I can say about him is I talked to one of our panelists today, and she said to me, he respects people. And that's what we're trying to do here. So thank you, Mayor. I also want to thank Chief Chris Reddy. We met with him a couple of weeks ago, and we hired one detail officer, but Chief Reddy said that he would have people circulating the area, and they're all over the place, if you didn't notice. So that's good. Thank you. Monsignor Paul Garrity, who's the former pastor of St. Mary's Church in Lynn, recently wrote an article on anti-Semitism for the Daily Item. In it, he wrote this: sadly, the number of anti-Semitic incidents continues to rise across the country, from the dissemination of hateful Jewish tropes to the painting of swastikas and other forms of vandalism. Then he says, Rabbi Jeffrey Myers correctly points out that it is not up to the victims of hate speech and religious persecution to do something about this, but rather it is up to the non-Jewish population to recognize the severity and perniciousness, big word, Father, you shouldn't use it, of anti-Semitic bigotry, and to do something about it. I respectfully disagree with that last comment, because I think we should all be lock arms and work on this together. I think everybody knows Jewish people are not afraid of organizing and fighting, and we all need to do this together. Prejudice is painful. Whether the pain is psychological or physical, it is still painful. Shut up, Jim. It hurts. Whatever we can do to change the dialogue would be extremely helpful. Imagine you are 4 years old and you ask to join a game, quiet, of hide and seek, and you are told no because you are black. Imagine that. 3 times, good. And imagine if you are the mother of that child. What does that mean on Mother's Day? The great civil rights leader Medgar Evers was shot at his home and found by his kids. That's how it sometimes ends. Catherine Hogan wrote, "How can we face ourselves if we give up and do nothing?" This contention is supported by Dr. Martin Luther King. It is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. When Cesar Chavez, one of my favorite all-time labor leaders and civil rights leaders, he was an optimist like me, who he said, when faced with an almost impossible task, he would say, "Esto es posible." Did I get that, Maria? In English, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, it means it is possible. And he lived that kind of life, and that's what we all should do. Mayor Michelle Wu, by the way, we have a person on the panel who's representing Asians. She's down the end here next to Ed Calnan. Her name is Miss Sun, Emilia Sun. So I had these quotes by Dr. King and by Cesar Chavez. And so I thought we needed an Asian person. So I called her up and I said, we need an Asian person. We need a philosopher, preferably a female from the 16th century. Now, I don't know how many of you know 16th century female philosophers from China, but she came up with one. It was Mayor Michelle Wu. And she states, "I want us to remember that hate cannot drive out hate. Only love and understanding can do that. We must come together as a community, support one another, and stand up against Asian hate. Our strength lies in unity. By working together, we can create a society where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued." I don't want to give away her remarks, but after you hear my wife speak, think about what she said and the complications for women in society and how prejudice takes place. You're going to speak briefly about former Speaker of the House. Our panel is bright and hardworking. It represents some, but not all, groups that experience. For those who are left out, we apologize, but we're hoping to get the idea across. When the panel has finished speaking, we will have a period of time for questions. And after the event is over, if you have follow-up comments or questions, you can call me at 7-8. I try to get another volunteer from the Bar Association, but everybody kind of ducked. So call me at 781-596-0100 or write to me at P.O. Box 2163, Lynn, Mass. Thank you very much. And I would now like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Mike Jalbert. Mike is the head of the history department at St. Mary's in Lynn. My wife says she can't hear me, and I think that might be a good thing. But I want to introduce Mike Jalbert, who's going to be our moderator for the evening. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Jim. First of all, I'd like to thank Jim for asking me to be a part of this event this evening. I'm truly honored to be up here playing some small role with these wonderful people who are going to speak tonight. My role tonight is not only to introduce everybody, but also because Jim doesn't want to be the bad cop, I have to be the bad cop. So if anybody tends to run a little bit long, if you hear a gentle behind you, that might be a reminder that, we want to move along sometime soon. Jim asked me what my previous experience as a moderator was after he asked me if I wanted to do this tonight. And I said, really, Jim, I don't have any, except my classroom every day. So welcome to my classroom. And I want to also mention that I'll be lodging a complaint with Jim formally this evening later on, because my immigrant community that I'm a couple generations out from, but the Franco-American community is not represented here tonight. We're about the only ones. But without further ado then, I'd like to introduce our first guest tonight. Judge Ina Howard-Hogan was born and raised here in Lynn and has a long career serving the public. She currently serves as a chief judge at Lynn District Court. And we're very much looking forward to her comments this evening. So, Judge Hogan.
I don't know about the funny part. That's not me. Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it is. When we thought about this panel and what would be helpful for all of us as a community, the biggest piece is us being here and being able to speak about this topic that folks tend to shy away from. It's important that we talk about this, that we understand each other. That is the only way we are going to move forward. Implicit bias. There is a consensus among experts that in all populations studied to date, humans have implicit biases which can be measured indirectly and are automatic in the sense that they occur without effort or intent. It affects our understanding, actions, and decisions. Where'd it come from? I will tell you for myself, I thought long and hard about this, for myself, because we all have them. As a child, in kindergarten, you look back at pictures, your memories. Good number of us, particularly if you grew up in the city of Lynn, you had childhood friends that you never once thought about their color. You never thought about their socioeconomic background? What you cared about is, this is my friend. When did that all change? When did that change? I look back for me, and I'll tell you, as a child, you listen to other people. Family members, no ill intent. Adults shape. We all do. We shape young minds. And so when we make comments in our households, in our cars, amongst our family, the young minds are listening. I was listening. That little white girl has different hair than you. They're different. What do you mean by that? They're just different. They wouldn't understand you. And as we get older, I think back from middle school and high school, where it became more apparent, those differences. Because now, me, as a young woman of color, oh, your hair's not straight enough. The characteristics or your features, your nose is too broad. Are you angry? No, I'm not angry. I didn't eat this morning. These are all things that you start experiencing, and people start talking to you, and it stays with you. And that's what I realized about the biases and some of the ideas that shaped my thinking. I have a husband who is Irish, Scottish, and I remember the comments from family members who, it's a joke. No, he's white, but he's not really white. He's cool. He's cool. What does that mean? What does that mean? And they really felt that way because they're like, yeah, no, but he could fit in. He could fit. What does that mean? Because as much as we were saying that, and at that time, I was like, oh, okay, he fits in. What did that mean to him as an individual? Never really thought about that. Never really thought about it. I do now. And then I become a judge. That road that I took, college, the experiences that I had in college, didn't quite prepare me for what I would face as an African female judge. Without that robe, who are you? Now, my friends in this room are like, well, that's Ina, she's a judge. I will tell you, there are several courts that I have been to in this Commonwealth, and you don't wear the robe all the time. Can I help you? Now, I will admit, hey, you got the wrong one, because no, you can't help me. But why? Why even ask? Because there are white female judges, white male judges that would never be asked that question. Do you get angry? It hurts. But you educate. You educate, because if you get angry and that's how you react and that's all you have to give, you're not helping the situation. You're not helping. So part of that is, okay, you might have mistook me for somebody else. How would I be back here in the chambers? But you might have mistook me for somebody else. I'll give you that. But you would hope that that incident or that interaction helped that individual to have a little better understanding that, you know what, I'm going to think twice about saying something that I'm not 100% sure about. Or I'm going to ask that question in a different way. Are you new here? Oh, I haven't seen you before. Because there is a better way to ask. As a judge, we have trials. And we have individuals that come before the court in the jury process. And the Supreme Judicial Court has come up with instructions to deal with this very subject, implicit bias. And I want to read these instructions to you because every juror that comes before me in the court, I read these instructions, and that's how important they are. Our system of justice depends on judges like me and jurors like you being able and willing to make careful and fair decisions. All people deserve fair and equal treatment in our system of justice, regardless of their race, national origin, religion, age, ability, gender, sexual orientation, education, income level, or any other personal characteristic. One difficulty comes from our own built-in expectations and assumptions. We want to be fair, but it's not always easy. These assumptions and expectations exist even if we're not aware of them, even if we believe we do not have them. Some of you may have heard of called implicit bias, and that's what we are talking about. Us judges have the same problem. Some of the strategies we use: slow down, do not make rush decisions. Hasty decisions are most likely to reflect stereotypes or hidden biases. Second, keep an open mind. Avoid drawing conclusions until the end of the case when you and your fellow jurors are able to deliberate. Third, listen closely to all the witnesses. This is the best way to ensure that you decide the case based on the evidence in the law instead of upon unsupported assumptions. Fourth, as you listen to the testimony about the people involved in the case, consider them as individuals rather than members of a particular group. Finally, I might ask myself, would I view the evidence differently if the people were from different groups, such as different racial, ethnic, or gender identity groups? All we ask is that you individually and as a group do your best to resolve the case based upon the evidence, the law, without sympathy, bias, or prejudice, to the best of your abilities as human beings. And we give that instruction. It shows how important it is for us to recognize that we all have these biases. When I was here, I was looking at some of the art in this room. And we had a conference, the judicial conference, dealing with racial and ethnic fairness. And one of the examples that one of the presenters gave was a picture of a little black girl, a little white girl, both with identical facial expressions. And the question was, which one is angry? And I was just like, oh my gosh, because I'm like, oh, the little black girl looks angry. No. Both of them had lost a toy and were sad. I look at this picture right here, and it struck me that I'm like, oh my goodness. And then you read the caption because, oh my, is she angry? She lost a tooth and didn't want to smile. Those are the biases and the implicit biases that we have when we see things. Why was one in my mind, oh, she's angry? And the other, I'm like, just having a bad day. Those are things we need to deal with within ourselves. What can each of us do? We want to acknowledge that there are implicit biases. We want to ask questions and do the things that we're doing here today to engage in conversation, meaningful conversations. How do you feel? And even if we don't agree, it's okay. Folks are entitled to their opinions. We want to be open and honest. It's not going to help any of us to tell people what you think they want to hear. You feel a certain way for a reason, and it's okay to explore that. Where did it come from? And the only way we're going to realize and figure out to help each other is being open and honest with each other. Not always easy, absolutely, because I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Trust me, it hurts more to be ignorant about someone's feelings. Educate yourself. Research. Remember, what you choose to consume will affect your implicit bias. What you choose to consume will affect your implicit bias. So if you want to learn about an individual, truly learn about an individual, do your research. The takeaway, we all need to speak up. We all need to speak up. I recently had young people in court on a case which involved a young transgender youth. And they were brought in, one was seeking a harassment prevention order against the other couple of young people. And I'm listening, and my heart's breaking, listening to the story, because it wasn't malicious. It wasn't. These young people had questions. They had questions in how they wanted to find out. They went the wrong way about addressing, and they didn't feel comfortable asking questions. We need to let young people know it's okay to ask these questions. You need to ask these questions, because when you don't, you end up, one, in the criminal justice system doing something that is criminal, or hurting someone else unintentionally. That day, I actually got off the bench, which I often do, and went down to speak to these young people. And I made the two individuals that were considered to be the bullies in this incident make me a promise. When you are in a situation, which you will be, when your friends, your family members, your colleagues are calling someone out, whether it be for their race, their gender, their socioeconomic background, for whatever reason, you speak up. You be the one to speak up. And I say that, and I said that to these young people, it is not easy. But when you do that, you are acknowledging and you're giving that kick in the ass to the implicit bias. You're educating yourself, and you're also making someone else feel a hell of a lot better about themselves. So I'm excited to hear from everyone else on this panel, because as I said, I think it's going to help all of us in this room to have conversations, tough conversations. So I thank you all.
Thank you, Judge Hogan. Our next speaker this evening, Rabbi Yossi Lipsker, comes to us from Swampscott. He's the son of a Shabbat rabbi, grew up in Pennsylvania, and opened a Shabbat of the North Shore in 1992. With a unique approach geared to fostering personal relationships and the love and support of his wife, Laya, and his 6 children, a small shul and Hebrew school grew to a large shul in Swampscott with branches in Peabody, Lynn, and Everett. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you. Where'd you find out all that information from? Is that my website? I think we need to update it a little bit. I have a grandson now. Congratulations. Thank you. thank you for having me. Thank you for those beautiful words. It's kind of hard to stand here speaking about this. So I'll tell you a quick story. I'll tell you a quick story. Don't ask me to be too loud because you're going to have to open up the windows here. So there's somebody trying to come to a job interview for a job that they need desperately. And 10 minutes is the appointment. They want to be on time. They can't find a parking space. They're circling, nothing. And starting to get desperate. Can't find a spot. Finally, he looks up to heaven and he says, "Dear God in heaven," he says, "I haven't been the best citizen, the model citizen. I haven't tithed. I haven't been the best parent. I haven't been the best husband. I really could work on myself, but I really need this job. And I'll make a little deal with you. If you can open up a parking space for me somewhere right here in the next 30 seconds, you're going to be looking at a changed man." And at that very moment, a car pulls out right in front of him. And he looks up to God. He says, "Actually, God, I'm all set. No, thank you." So we talk about doing things that are impactful, that are thoughtful and sensitive and make a difference. And we make our deals, but more often than not, our good intentions fall short, and the list of hurdles grows longer. As we say in Judaism, Hayom melacha, Hayom katser v'hamlacha meruba. The day is short and the work is great. But we get distracted and we get overwhelmed with everything else. And so we compartmentalize. And I think this is part of that bias. And we prioritize the things that we feel instinctively and intuitively are in our best interests. So let me talk about anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish prejudice for a moment. When societies can't protect their citizens, and I'm up here speaking as a rabbi, so I'll talk about the Jewish population, but by no means is the Jewish population alone in being victims of prejudice and hate. Sadly, that's not the case. But when a society can't protect an entire group of people, and they choose to either minimize, redefine, or push off a solution, then what they're failing to do is to protect their own democracy. Now, I'm saying all this, and of course I'm thinking about Europe. Because here in America, we didn't deal with this. And we smugly told our families living in Paris, What the hell do you need it for? Why should you live in a community where you can't walk with a yarmulke, where you can't have your tzitzis, or you literally get beaten? Like it's almost a guarantee if you walk out onto the Pletzel, which is an area where Jews go to get kosher food, and you look like this, and you don't exactly, I know I don't exactly blend, then you're basically, there's the 80% chance that you're going to be hurt. But that was all in Europe. We here in America, nobody even thought about such a thing. Yes, of course, there's anti-Semitism, but it's a different kind of anti-Semitism. It's more subtle, but it's not overt. Well, guess what, folks? It's here. And it's here with a vengeance that has taken us all by surprise. And it's quite shocking in the lack of restraint. Everything goes. And so we do need an American call to action that mobilizes our leadership in all of its sectors to have a better understanding of what's happening here and to prevent and actively combat anti-Semitism, because what starts with the Jews rarely ends with the Jews. I think history has taught us that. And so anti-Semitism in the United States is not a Jewish problem. It's an American problem. Because like racism or any other form of bigotry, it's a rot and a decay at the core of our society. And if we don't shore up the foundational platforms of our society, then we all end up sinking. But if we can come together and do things as a community in a spirit of understanding and harmony and a genuine desire for mutual understanding, then the rising tide raises all the ships. And it's hard, I'll conclude with this. It's hard for me to see this happening. I grew up in Philadelphia, Northeast Philadelphia. We had our fair share of anti-Semitism. Once a month, I came home from Pathmark with all the eggs broken and my face bloodied, and I always put up a good fight. I was never scared of a street fight. But it was part of our reality. But what was hanging over our heads was the Holocaust. I grew up in an area where there was a heavy concentration of Holocaust survivors. And they went to our synagogue, and they all had their numbers. And let me tell you something. My home, growing up in Philadelphia, was like a refuge station for them because they had so many problems. They had so many social issues that they dealt with, family issues. And they came to our house to find kindness and relief. And at the end of the day, being in America or being in my parents' house was a way of forgetting where they came from. But my father grew up in Russia. He had to leave there when he was 6 years old. He came from a family of 15. And they had to run out of Russia in the middle of the night. One of them died along the way. They had dogs set after them. My entire childhood, it wouldn't take 15 minutes with my father driving in the car till we got pulled over. Automatically. Why? Because my father would look in the rearview mirror and he would spot a police officer in a cruiser 5 blocks back. And instantly, his entire body would tense up. Because a person in uniform coming from Soviet Russia, the person in uniform was the enemy. Any uniform. And so my father would start shivering and sweating and gripping the wheel. And of course, driving erratically and acting so suspicious that he always did get pulled over because he was so suspicious looking. And like they would pull us over and say, "Rabbi, is everything okay? You look like you're falling apart." And till this day, he hasn't been able to get over that. And watching him watch what's going on today, after he spent a lifetime trying to outgrow the pain of living in a totalitarian world and the triggers and the traumas, and to be here in America where that doesn't happen and to see it happening, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see us having slipped back as a community. And it's all of us. And it's not just anti-Semitism. It's any child that struggles with acceptance and spends so much of their pure, youthful, soulful energy protecting themselves is a catastrophe that we have allowed on our watch. And I'll end with something from Jewish law, where it's called the law when they couldn't find a perpetrator in a certain murder, for example. And there was 2 cities close by each other. So the closest city to the crime became the responsible. The city became responsible, and they penalized all the elders in that city. Why? Like, they didn't do anything. They didn't commit the murder. He said, no, they didn't commit it, but it was committed under their watch. And therefore, they are complicit, and they are responsible. We are all responsible for one another. And so I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to stand here and to share these words. I hope that for me, this is the beginning of many more interactions like this. And yeah, thank you so much.
Well, after our first 2 speakers tonight, I think the rest of our lineup tonight has a lot to live up to. So thank you, Rabbi, for powerful words. So our next speaker tonight is well known to most of the Lynn community, Ed Calnan. Ed's resume is too long to read. It takes up too many decades, Ed. So just to hit on a couple highlights, Ed has been a bricklayer in Local 12 here in Lynn. He has his BA from UMass in Boston. He's been in the real estate and insurance business. He was one time the chief of staff for Mayor David Phillips. He's been a counselor at large here in Lynn and the chairman of the Charter Commission here in Lynn, and is currently serving as the president of St. Mary's Plaza and St. Teresa House. That's overseeing 134 units of affordable housing for seniors and people with disabilities here in Lynn. So Ed does a great service to us. I'd like to also mention that Ed does a great service to us at St. Mary's by donating his time and expertise. So Ed Calnan.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Jim Carrigan for inviting us tonight to serve on this important panel. I'm the seventh of 8 kids, and I've always had advice from my older siblings, and my brothers always told me when I started in government service to stand up to be seen, speak up to be heard, and sit down to be appreciated. So I expect to do that. I'll be talking about how and why Irish immigrants came to this country in such great numbers, how they were received in this country, and how they climbed the ladder of success, becoming one of the most successful of the immigration groups, and how we need to guard against any inclination to regard present-day immigrants and others as somehow unworthy to enjoy the great benefits our country has to offer. Now, my parents came from Ireland, Bridget, my mother from County Kerry, and my father, John, from County Cork. They left Ireland separately in 1923 to seek more freedom and opportunities for a better life. They had learned in school from their extended family members how Ireland had been under the control of the British Empire for over 700 years. They were told of the campaign of General Oliver Cromwell, who was sent to Ireland in the 1650s to enforce laws designed to beat the population into submission. They learned of the many deaths of civilians and how Cromwell sent some 70,000 Irish people, mostly women and children, to Barbados and the West Indies to be sold as slaves on plantations. The Irish then were among the first slaves in the Western Hemisphere. My parents learned of the details of Ireland's Great Famine of the 1840s, where millions of people died or immigrated to escape the horrors of starvation and disease. They learned of the many uprisings to achieve freedom for Ireland that were unsuccessful, until the rising in Dublin in 1916, when they were teenagers, which, although unsuccessful from a military sense, it strategically set up the Irish War of Independence that resulted in the Irish Free State. Irish people finally achieved self-rule in their own country. My father served in the War of Independence as a member of the Irish Republican Army. My parents met in Lynn and were married and had 8 kids. We lived in several locations in the Brickyard neighborhood of Lynn. Brickyarders saw no problem with lots of moves, joking that it was cheaper than paying rent. The Brickyard was truly a melting pot. There were many nationalities living there with all colors and religions represented. The thing we had in common was we were all of the same economic class. We were all poor. Life was hard there, Yet it would be difficult to find people who lived there who didn't feel that life's lessons learned in the neighborhood helped them in achieving success in later years. Though, yes, those of us of Irish background suffered prejudice from so-called nativists. Stereotypical terms such as hops, thick mix, patties, greenhorns, lace curtain Irish, kitchen canaries were commonly used. But we recognized that others in the neighborhood were suffering under the same circumstances. But signs saying no Irish need apply for job openings in previous generations, and violence, particularly against Irish immigrants, by the then active Know Nothing Party, was all part of the mosaic. The Irish found that one way to begin the climb of ladder to success was through the development of political organizational skills. Another was to embrace the union movement, which is widely recognized now as having built the great middle class in this country. My father was a construction laborer who, with several others, petitioned the National Union in the 1930s to start a local in Lynn to represent workers looking for a better deal in working conditions, wages, and benefits. He served as the first president of Labor's Local 290 of Lynn. My uncle Jeremiah worked as the business agent for Local 290 for 45 years. People of my generation then had a little boost from those before us. We got educated, found good jobs, had families, and were able to give them better opportunities than we had. That's how it's supposed to work in our society. We are a nation of immigrants. Everybody here came from someplace else at one time or another. Sometimes there's a tendency to pull up the ladder of success after them. We need to acknowledge that no matter when people or their ancestors came to this country, there will always be some people that need a little extra help on those first rungs on the ladder to a better life. It would be in our own best interest to help them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Our next speaker this evening came to the United States only 5 years ago. Born and raised in China, Emilia Sun came to the U.S., obtained an MFA from Rochester Institute of Technology, majoring in visual communication design. She's a senior graphic designer at Essex Media Group, and we'd like to welcome Emilia.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I moved. I have been living in Lynn just 1 year. For the past year, I've been living here, and people often ask me if I like living here in the United States. At first, I would say yes and mention things like the education system and how people care about environment and human rights. However, since the COVID-19 pandemic began, I've seen a significant increase in hate crimes and incidents targeting Asian Americans. We've all heard the news and seen the videos of Asian Americans being attacked and harassed, like the man who attacked several people in the New York City subway system, and including a 65-year-old woman who was set on fire. We've seen the UCLA student making racist remarks against Asians during a Zoom meeting. And we've heard politicians and media outlets use terms like China virus and Kung flu, contributing to anti-Asian sentiment and hate incidents. What many people may not know is that many hate incidents go unreported due to fear of retaliation, language barriers, and mistrust of law enforcement. I myself have experienced this kind of hate. About a year ago, I was at Stop Shop in Lynn with my 15-month-old daughter when a drunk man yelled at us, "Go back to your country." He even threatened to kill my baby, and no one around us stopped him. I felt angry, upset, and scared. I didn't feel safe to living here anymore, and I even considered leaving the country. But I'm here to ask you, what are you willing to do to make a change? I ask that you and your family learn about Asian American history, culture, and contributions to society. This can help to dispel stereotypes and promote understanding and empathy. If you witness hate or discrimination, speak out against it and report it to the public authorities. And at last, I don't know if anyone have any questions for me, but I do have a question for everyone. Why people hate Chinese? Thank you.
Thank you, Emilia, for sharing the story, your compelling story with us. Incredibly brave to do that. So our next speaker tonight is Kennan McKenzie-DeFranza. Kennan would describe herself as a lifelong educator who's worked in the nonprofit K-12 and higher education sector. She promotes opportunity and is seeking to remove barriers to students for realizing their full potential. She's currently the president of the North Shore branch of the NAACP. Welcome, Ken.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I am pleased to be here as a fill-in, I was told, for Tanisha Sullivan, my fellow branch president. So I'm going to be ad-libbing a little bit, but I'm so happy to be here. I happen to have a child who attends high school in Lynn, so I feel like I'm here all the time. I really appreciate the previous comments and the ability to participate this evening. And in my other life, I often teach in higher ed, and one of the courses I teach is research methods. And what I like to say to my students is similar to what we heard the Honorable Judge say earlier. The reason we talk about data and we talk about what we can predict is to inform. But what happens is we look at the data and the information about young people and we predict. And so we think about a world where you cannot look at the variables of one's birth and predict failure. However, at this point in our country, those variables are still pretty accurate. For me, the objective of my lifetime is to make sure those variables are inconsequential. I'm originally from Georgetown, Guyana, and I had no idea what poverty was. And I didn't know what race was or racism was until I came to the United States. I was very fortunate to be insulated for several years culturally from what the broader United States concept of race was. I had Caribbean teachers when I arrived to the United States, and my parents were surrounded by a large Caribbean community. All I knew was that I was supposed to do well. I was supposed to study hard, have good manners, etc. My first encounter of something being off about that concept was when my mother tried to enroll me in school for the first time. I was old enough to remember it. I was almost 7 years old, and she took me to our local neighborhood school. And I just remember the conversation going something like, but people from third world countries, we don't put them in their grade. They always go back a grade. And my mother looked at them and said, well, then we're gonna go to private school. And that's what we did for several years. She got a second job. My stepfather did the same. And they paid for me to avoid that unfortunate situation. How many families can do that? Why should families have to do that? So although I'm from British Guyana and I was not an English language learner, I care about those families that come here that are speaking English as a second, third, or fourth language. And we disparage that instead of encouraging our children to be multilingual, which is ultimately what we ask for when we get to college. Somehow we value that later, right? How can we affirm what children come to this country with? How can we affirm those differences as being assets to their success? So I'm just gonna give a couple of stories to, sorry, I'm short, I'm gonna pull it down. I'm gonna give a couple of stories just to ground this a little bit. So I'm the first Black elected official in my city of Beverly. I have a doctorate in education. I've been in education my entire career. And for the first time, someone came to our school committee meeting several years ago and pointed at me and said, how did she get here? Many of you have probably seen the 10-minute YouTube clip on that. This was during the pandemic, so thankfully I had a mask on and I could sort of hold my face together behind that. And so our mayor said, do you mean Dr. McKenzie? And she said, no, I mean her. And this went on for a bit, and then there was a follow-up person to her commentary. Never before on our school committee had anybody been asked that question. It wasn't because I was speaking, it wasn't because I was on the agenda. That was the objective of her coming to the microphone. It has a sort of happy ending. So I held my tongue and I thought about my ancestors and I thought about what I was there to do. And I was not interested in this debate. But afterwards, it galvanized our local community. We had a flag raising that said Beverly was not a place for hate. Our branch galvanized and got more members. I then became the president of our branch, which is only a 2-year-old branch of the NAACP. And so we used that to leverage the interest of the community in eradicating this kind of prejudice. I also received an apology from that person. And I accepted it because I accept, as we heard earlier, many of these narratives are built in and codified and reinforced by the things we consume, the things we say to one another and around one another and to our young children. And it did me no good to walk around holding a grudge, but I understand the power of these narratives. The last thing I'm gonna say as I focus on education is it is not the case that our young children, our babies and our preschoolers are immune from this. I often talk about one of our case studies from Yale School of Medicine, where, similar to our beautiful artwork here, we have young children on video and they're playing with toys. And the teacher is asked, I want you to tell me who's misbehaving. Press your buzzer when you see it. And so they decided to create a group that was a diverse group of children, black boy, black girl, white boy, white girl, just to mix it up. And the teachers themselves were also mixed racially, all women, preschoolers, 3-year-olds. And so at the end of the time, they looked at all the clickers to see who'd been clicked about. I'll spare you the, I'm sure you can fill in the blank, okay. What was interesting though, is none of the children were misbehaving. There was nothing pedagogically wrong that they were doing. But what they had done as researchers is they had installed eye trackers on the teachers to see where they were looking to find the misbehavior. And lo and behold, they were all looking at the little black boy to see if he'd misbehave, most of the time. There are 4 children, but over half the time, the white teachers were looking at the little black boy. And so the next question was, well, what were you clicking about? Why were you clicking? And the teacher said, well, I clicked when I thought he would misbehave, which meant like reaching for a pencil, standing up. They anticipated negative behavior from a 3-year-old. Now, if you translate that to in-school behavior, disciplinary practices, expectations, it has real-world consequences for how our children experience school, what kind of expectations we have for them, how we label them, how we assess them. It is dire. And these are people who love children and don't mean to do that. Our brains are wired to protect ourselves. We create stories, we have stereotypes, some of them are even funny. I love Caribbean jokes, I really do. My husband's Italian, I love the Italian jokes. When you put them together, it's the same people. We love our moms, we like food, right? Some of them are funny, but they can be harmful and dangerous if unchallenged, right? So what we think about is, how do we use the information we may have about our groups, about our students, the data, the assessments, to inform, and as we heard earlier, to help, to elevate people's status and situations, rather than to predict failure and to become hopeless. So I would say, I'm not in the legal profession, but I have a lot of respect for the legal profession and how it dovetails with our educational goals. We need to use the information that we have as a method to increase growth and uplift, and not to write off entire groups of people. And so with that, I would love to say that I love our educators. Most of them are doing the right thing. Some of them need to be better informed about how to use this information and how to engage with these differences. But we owe it to our young people. They have so much potential. And when they are born, when they are freshly given to us as gifts in society, I want to know that we will no longer look at that information and be able to predict who will do well and who will not, just based on their zip code. Thank you.
I keep coming up here trying to find the words to thank people for the incredible things that they've shared with us. I'm not doing that well enough. I'm not doing that nearly well enough, so maybe I won't even try anymore. So our next guest this evening is Gugino Carrigan, and as many of you know, she practices law right here in Lynn with her husband Jim, which means she spends most of the day, giving him a hard time and putting him in his place. I can hear that right up here. So, Ann has served the Lynn community and North Shore community for a long time. She's been she's a former president of Girls Inc. She's also a former member of the Lynn, or current member of the Lynn Women's Lawyers Association, and former president of both the Essex County Bar Association and the Greater Lynn Bar Association. So we look forward to hearing what Ann has to say tonight.
Listening to people who've gone before me, I think I really did not have it that bad. My father and mother, for some reason, never treated me any differently than they would if I were a son. They figured I could do anything that I wanted as long as I worked for it and as long as they educated me and saw that I was educated. And so a lot of the biases for women are implicit ones. The ones that my sister and I, 2 cousins lived upstairs. They were boys, but we certainly did not play with the same toys. I don't think the boys upstairs would have played with a doll if their life depended on it. However, I did have my Annie Oakley outfit, so I had my gun and my whatever. So again, but here's the bias. whatever you think of her, Nancy Pelosi was one of the strongest, most powerful women in the country. And the issues, I think, are power, aggressiveness, words that a lot of people, when they talk about women with those attributes, equate with the word bitch. So Nancy, when she started, first entered the House of Representatives, she was treated as a rich bimbo housewife who had done nothing except stay home and raise her 5 children. So they said to her, a woman's place is in the home, not the house. Well, it took her 30 years, but she became the most powerful person in the House when she became Speaker of the House. In the meantime, though, she had been the minority whip, which was the head of, when the Democrats were not in power, she was still the most powerful woman. But for all those years, she was in the House in 1987, and she became Speaker in 2007. 30 years, minority whip. She was never once invited into the office of the Speaker of the House until she became Speaker and got rid of him. In that time, and after that time, she was instrumental in passing the Affordable Care Act. Again, whether you think of it, that was a huge piece of legislation, and it was on both sides of the aisle. And she said that she used her ability to manage 5 children to move all of those representatives into place to vote for the Affordable Care Act. She stayed up all night talking to them and listening to them and then putting pressure on them. So, and she did the repeal of the military don't ask, don't tell. And then when the whole financial market collapsed because there were no constraints on banks, she was responsible for regulating, passing regulations against Wall Street. And if they'd only talked to her earlier, maybe a lot of those things would have happened earlier and we would have been better off. But one thing that I do regret is that I was not able to play team sports when I was in school. And it turns out, you probably think, Title IX is the legislation that says that you have to fund girls' sports the same. Now, I don't know, you probably think it's kind of recent. It was passed in 1972, 50 years ago it's taken for instance, the women's national soccer team. They just got, through a court case, reached a settlement with the United States National Soccer Federation. But up until that time, they were paid 4 times less than the men. They had crappy training facilities and locker rooms and meals. But during that time, while they were earning 4 times less, they won 4 World Cups, 4 Olympic gold medals, and the men's team didn't even qualify for the 2020 Olympics and never won a World Cup. So it seems like that's a great achievement. Oh, fine, the women finally got, income on a par. But here's the problem. Why does it have to be the best women's soccer team? Why couldn't they fund them when they were as good or not as good as the men's team? That's when real equality will come. It's the implicit bias that's going to be the issue, or is the issue at this time, even though there's been great strides. And by the way, in 1972, when they passed Title IX, only 7% of high school girls were in sports. And now it's 41%. So there's been some strides. There's other little things. I'll just say one thing. At one time, at one point, before I was lucky enough to meet my husband, I was a divorced woman. I had a job that I'd had for years, owned my own home, and I applied for a Sears credit card. You know, it was the card, yeah. And Sears wouldn't give me the card because I wouldn't have my ex-husband co-sign it, saying that if I didn't pay, he would be responsible. So a shout out to Girls Inc., and I know Deborah's here. Their mission is to equip girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And as long as Samara, where'd you go? If we have girls like Samara Wilkie here, who's going to become one of these girls who's strong, smart, and bold, and not afraid to say, yeah. You want to say hello? Yeah. She'll say hello.
Say hello.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
What's your name?
My name is Samara Wilkie, and I've been at Brothers Deli down there with my mom for ever since I was born,
How old are
really.
you? 13, since day one. So 13 minus 1 day, so 13 1 day. Minus 1 day. So, Samara and I will talk about all these things.
Yeah.
What
That's
is,
all right. You can.
Men of color or women of color? Nothing. And the news always talk, men of color, women of color. I never saw that in my life. So how this going to collect this storm? So the news say, oh, men of color became a mayor of Lynn. Men of color became a woman of color became mayor of Boston. It's not a thing to present that. Everybody has a name. It's a name for everybody. So I never accept men of color or men of women or men of this and that. I accept the name of person. So me and Samara, we have a little discussion about that.
Yes.
And she's always there, and she always asks me questions, why you talk this, why this. Samara, her father is from Jamaica, right? And her mother's from Lynn. They're both Lynnies. And they're both living a great life. I don't want to call Samara man or woman, man of color, woman of color. I want to call Samara Wilkie.
Strong woman,
Yes,
right? Yes.
strong woman. I don't want
Yeah.
to take anybody's name like, I think that's the reason we're here tonight. As I hear from everybody, we are one. We have no color. We have names.
I'm messing this up.
That's how me and Samara
Sorry,
agree.
Yep.
We have names. We don't have color.
Okay.
And we're all together.
Thank you, George.
That's how it goes.
Thank you, George, Samara, and Ann. It's wonderful to see young people up here, too. Before I move on to introduce our next person, I want to mention that Jim told me that Ann was only supposed to have 3 minutes, but I didn't want him to get in trouble at home. So, and on a personal note, Ann mentioned Title IX, and not many of you, some of you might know. I've coached girls basketball with one of my good friends, Jeff Newhall, at St. Mary's in Lynn for the last 20 years. And the thing that we're most proud of in doing that for all those years, and we've won 5 state championships, but the thing we're most proud of is the fact that every single one of those girls who played for us for 4 years all went on to college, and they all graduated college. Every last one of them. And that's how Title IX has changed the lives of people, among other ways. Our next speaker tonight is Coco Alinsug, and Coco is one of those people that you look at their resume and go, how does he do all this, and when does he have time to do it? He's, as most of you know, He's the first Filipino-American city councilor elected in New England. He's the outreach manager for Fenway Health and travels around the country educating people about LGBTQ+ health and vaccine research. He's one of the original members of the protocol team that designed the study designed for the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. He's also a former executive director of NAGLI. He is a polyglot, which means he's fluent in many languages, which is incredibly impressive, and immigrated to the United States in 1996. I could keep going, but no. Well, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. I would like to request everybody to do some quick stretch because I almost fall asleep. Everybody raise your hand. I don't want you to fall asleep because I was staring at some of you. Maybe it's the wine or I don't know. But okay, shake your hand, shake. All right, thank you. Woo. Okay, before I'll start, I'll make sure I'll speak for 2 minutes, period. Number 2 is I would like to acknowledge 3 things. This is very important, that I'm in no way representing the whole of the LGBTQ community. So I could look at the room now, I could see 1 or 2 people who could clearly be sitting there right now. I also would like to acknowledge that we have a diversity, inclusivity representative director at the City of Lynn, thanks to Mayor McGee and Mayor Nicholson, Faustina over there. So we want to talk to her later. She's a wealth of information. I also would like to acknowledge a lot of leaders in the community that are here, again, that would represent any of the seats here. So I got a call from Jim and told me, Coco, can you talk about how fabulous being gay man is? That's not exactly the words he said. He basically said, talk about being LGBT. But I was also laughing because Attorney Capano and I keep changing our notes after hearing from a lot of people and deleting a lot of our highlights here, which is very important because the reason why I came to this country is to be myself. As a gay man and not being out in the Philippines, it was very difficult. So I said, I will come to America, live my life as an open gay man. So when did I hear somebody clapping there? Thank you. I don't want to hide anymore. I want to be true to myself. I want to be honest and find the love of my life. Sorry, English is not my main language. So when I first won as city councilor in Ward 3, the news clipping came out and say, the first gay LGBT councilor in Lynn. And I said, are you sure? The mayor, our neighbor, is laughing. But my husband corrected me. I think they meant the first out LGBT city councilor of Lynn. So I'm very proud and honored to be included in the long list of the city of Lynn's first, city of first, being the first Filipino city councilor in New England. So the following day, I got a call from the president of the Philippines saying, the moment you go back to the country, please let us know. We will give you an honor at the presidential palace. So that was an honor. I didn't know that, but the ambassador of the Philippines called. So again, the city of first, right, Mayor? So when I came here, the first thing I did was to volunteer in working with LGBT youth. So 20 years ago, I moved to Lynn. You could probably see me in the middle of the night walking in downtown Lynn, giving information. We receive a lot of calls from a lot of Lynn kids being kicked out by their parents because they came out. Now remember, this was 20 years ago. Now being gay is cool, kinda, right? But 20 years ago, a lot of our kids are, did I hear something? Except in Florida, yeah, we're in Lynn. We'll talk more. Like what I said, this is a larger conversation. We're just getting 1% of all of these conversations. So, when I moved here, it was really difficult to see kids being kicked out. We spent a lot of money putting these kids to some hotels, so we could find a permanent home for them to stay. We talked to a lot of LGBT couples to open their homes for these kids. And now I'm very proud and honored to say that the organization that I started in New England, in North Shore, called NAGLI, the North Shore Alliance of LGBTQ Youth, has now a permanent space and still open in Lynn. And even when you go to the Y, which is a mainstream organization, has now embraced being LGBT youth and opened their doors for LGBT youth. So, the battle is not over. There's still a lot of discriminations out there. Even when I was running for public office, I hear calls here and there. But I need to move forward, because in order for us to move forward is to acknowledge that there's a problem, but at the same time, you need to be at that table and having that conversation. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Maybe that'll be a little better. Thank you, Coco. Our next speaker this evening is Mario Capano. For those of you who know Mario, which is probably most of us familiar to Lynn, he's practiced law in Lynn for the last 30 years. He's a past president of the Justinian Law Society of Massachusetts, past president of the Greater Lynn Bar Association, is currently on the board of directors of the Essex County Bar Association. He's a family man, father of 3 sons, Nick, AJ, and Jonathan, and welcome, Mario.
Good evening, everyone. We all know when Jim Carrigan speaks, you listen, so here I am. You're welcome. I guess I'm more fortunate, perhaps, than the groups being represented here today. I get to speak from an historical perspective for the Italians, the Italian Americans. I am first generation Italian. Both of my parents came from the old country, as we call it. My father came here when he was 6. My mother came here when she was 17. The Italian population came in droves like the Irish in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and we faced discrimination. We faced harassment. We faced stereotypes. There are any number of derogatory terms for an Italian who came to this country. I won't go through the litany of what they are. But we came here, the Italians came here with the goal of having a better life, just like the immigrants that are coming here now, and just like the people that are coming here now and their children. And my parents worked at the General Electric for 40 years. They worked the lowest of jobs. They had problems with housing. They had problems with the English language. My mother worked 35 years at a job that took a physical toll on her, because that's all that the Italians had when they came here. But they worked hard, and all they wanted, which is the same thing that all immigrants want, they want a good education, and they want their kids to do better than they did. So I am very proud to be an Italian American, and I have joined any number of organizations in the legal community that that sponsor, that cheer on our Italian American heritage. The Justinian Law Society of Massachusetts is an organization that was started 80 years ago. It's an organization of all the Italian American judges and lawyers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And it's been 80 years. And they formed because of the prejudice and the discrimination against Italian lawyers, and how difficult it was for an Italian to get into law school back in the day, so to speak. So I have a lot to be thankful for, and I can just say that I think historically, whatever group it is that's coming in faces the same harassment and discrimination, and I wish we could stop it. And I think everyone everywhere has implicit bias, but a lot of us face explicit bias, Rabbi. It's not so hidden anymore. That's not good. I thought we were moving away from that, and we all need to do more work. Everyone, as Mr. Calnan said, everyone comes from somewhere else. The only Native Americans are the Native Americans. If everyone would learn from history, they would know that we are a melting pot. And each new wave of immigrants that comes to this country through the generations become hardworking, contributing American citizens. And that's all we can hope for. And that's what makes our country great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. As Mario and Ed and a few other people have mentioned this evening, we tend, as Ed put it, to sometimes pull up the ladder behind us. I mentioned my own family experience briefly. Born in the Franco-American community in Lewiston, Auburn, Maine, which by the time I arrived on the scene in 1967, was very well established. But my grandparents didn't get the same reception when they moved there, and their predecessors didn't either. The first 5 Catholic churches in Lewiston, Maine were burned to the ground. Ironically, or maybe not so ironically, these days in Lewiston, Maine, the Somali community has been a recent immigrant community there, and they're suffering the same sorts of discrimination that my predecessors did there. And all too often a cyclical thing. And we need to find a way to stop that, and it's great that we're all here tonight to try and do that. Our next guest tonight is Carolina Trujillo. Carolina has spent most of her career working in human services. Currently, she serves as the executive director at the Citizens Inn, but she also sits on a variety of other boards of directors. Another one of those people, where do they find all the time, including Northeast ARC, Peabody Chamber of Commerce, Beth Israel Leahy Health, and she's also recently appointed as a member of Governor Maura Healey's Latino Empowerment Council. So, welcome, Carolina.
Hey, everybody. Who likes trivia? All right, great, because we're going to be playing some trivia if this stands. Only if this stands. All right, so I'm Carolina Trujillo, and I'm an immigrant of Colombia. Who knows where Colombia is? Who's heard of the country of Colombia? Great. What is the most imported export from Colombia into the United States? So it's really good that you say coffee. Most people say it's cocaine. So because most people think it's cocaine, I'll give you a snapshot of what it is to be a Colombian migrant coming through the United States immigration system. All right? So again, my name is Carolina Trujillo. I have an undergrad in journalism, mass communications. I have 2 master's degrees from Suffolk University, one in public administration, one in political science with a concentration in international relations. I have more than 20 years of experience working in communities, human services, social services. So as you can see, I'm quite educated. When I come through the American immigration vetting station, I am a mule. That's how I am treated, and that's how I am vetted, and that's how I'm detained. I know for a fact that my connection needs to be at least 4 hours apart from my arrival time into the United States. Because as soon as they see me, and I don't know what you see when you see me, but I can tell you what they see when they see me. They see a person that probably has nexus to a cocaine cartel. I'm originally from Cali, Colombia. One of the biggest cartels was the Cali cartel, very well known. And they believe that I'm transporting drugs in my stomach. So they purposely detain me, question me, separate me from the rest of the group, and I am left there with, obviously, the threat that I'm gonna be transported to the hospital to get an x-ray in my stomach. Because the drugs, where did I get the drugs? And this is what they see when they see me. So that's my experience being an immigrant in your country every time I come in. I've been a citizen of this country, I think more than 10 years now. I've been here 25 years, contributing since I got here, yet working twice as hard to believe to be half as good. Let me repeat that. Working twice as hard to believe to be half as good. As you probably hear me, I have an accent because English is not my first language, and I'm always learning and mesmerized by the significance of words. I know I have people that I constantly bother. I know the publisher of the item is here, and I constantly go to him for knowledge, for wording, for pronunciation, to make sure that I understand the context in which a word can be applied. And he always tells me, you're one of the few people I know that has so much interest in learning a word in order to apply it correctly. Yet, when people see me, they see a cleaning lady. They see a person that takes care of kids. They probably think that I have maybe at least 5 children because I'm Latino, and that I spend most of my time in the kitchen cooking. They never imagine me in the shoes of an executive director. They never imagine me in leadership roles. I'm usually the only Latina sitting at tables of power, really bringing that voice of disparity and really bringing the voice of communities that are underserved and underrepresented by systems that have been put in place. And it's a lonely journey. It's very lonely, but it's very true. So as much as we want to tell each other that racism is a myth, that we're doing better, that we don't see color, please remember, every time you say to a person that they don't see color, you don't see me because I'm colored. So it's really invalidating my existence. So even though the sentence seems to be well-intended, it's not well-received. So a little bit of education will go a long way, right?
Thank you, Carolina. I see a pretty powerful person. That's what I see. Our next guest tonight is Fatima El Hali. Fatima came to the United States in 2004 at 39 years old. She hit the books immediately. She got her GED. She went to community college. And then she got her BA at Springfield College. She also has an interpreter certificate from North Shore Community College. She works at Pathways as an advisor for adult education and also works as an Arabic interpreter. Welcome, Fatima.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, everyone, for making the time and coming tonight to this event. And thank you to Mr. Jim to invite me and giving me this opportunity to talk. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, as Michael said, I came to the U.S. in 2004 with my husband and 3 children. He used to work for U.S. Embassy in Morocco for 27 years. There, That's why my children wanted to come for the better education, and he always talk about his job and how American people treat him at work. He was happy to be there since he was 20 years to 47. So we came to the US seeking better life, better education. But as everyone said, we really faced discrimination. One time I was at the hospital. I had pain and was waiting. So when I was waiting alone, I asked the front desk where I'm gonna go to see the doctor. She said, we are waiting for the interpreter. I said, who asked you to call an interpreter? Because I do speak English. I know I have accent, but I can understand the doctor, and I still have pain. I could have seen the doctor for a while ago. Another time, my daughter was, when we just came, my daughter went to high school. She was in 12th grade. She went to English high school in Jamaica Plain. One of the professors, EL teacher, didn't like her because she was one of the Arabic Muslim students who wear the scarf and the skirt. So he ignored her, staying in the back, never asked her to read or write. Even she raised her hand, he never asked her to. She was crying and wanted to quit school, so I pushed her to stay. Because that's why we came here, for the education. Why you wanted to leave? She said, no, I couldn't. He makes fun of me, and so me and her father tried hard for her to stay. At the end of the semester, she got good grades for every subject except for him. He put incomplete for her. So she was crying, and one of the other teachers held her hand and asked her to say what was happening. And she said, I have heard of this. Just come with me. And she took her to the principal's office, and she told them what happened. And they called him. When he came, he said, well, she never returned the work. My daughter said, no, I do have my work, and it has your handwriting because you graded them. And I will bring them tomorrow. The second day, he changed the grades without seeing them. And so that's why, as an advisor at Pathways, I always help students, support them, and advise them to speak for themselves, educate them about the discrimination, because without that, my daughter won't be where she is now. She graduated from Bunker Hill, and she graduated from Quincy College as a laboratory technician. And Jim heard her, she talked to him. Her English is perfect. She's now doing very well. So.
You got a good mom.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Fatima. It's tragic that children can face these sort of obstacles in the last place that they should ever find them in their schools and from their teachers. And hopefully we can all learn from that. Our next speaker tonight is Christina Adeoye. Christina is a young person who's very exciting to all of us. She's a senior at Lynn English. She's the president of the Environmental Club and is a founder of the Inclusivity Club there. She's a peer leader at Girls Inc. And she's going to be attending North Carolina Central University this fall. She's got a curious blend of majors, intended environmental science and business. And I hope to hear someday how that works out. So we're very excited to meet Christiana tonight and hear from her.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say that I'm so honored to be here. First of all, it's really amazing to hear all the people that have spoken. I'm 18 years old. I moved here to the United States when I was 11 from Nigeria. And I would say it was a pretty difficult transition to move here. But the official language for Nigeria is English. We have like tribes, and I have my own language that I speak, which is Yoruba. But in school, I would go to school, or whenever someone or a person would hear me speak, and they would make comments like, "Oh, your English is so good," or like, "How'd you learn it so quick?" And whenever I would hear that statement or like that word, I would find myself getting a little bit frustrated and upset because I just think to myself, well, I already knew English. It might not be like American English. It might be with an accent, but I knew English. So those types of comments made me feel less than or like uneducated. And for a while, I would let it go on and just smile or like laugh whenever my teachers or someone else would say those. But when later on in middle school and high school, 8th grade, 9th grade, I started to challenge them a little bit and like correct them. I would be like, well, I didn't have to learn it. I already knew English, so. And whenever they would keep making the same mistakes, I would keep correcting them. And I think it's really important to speak up whenever you feel, I guess, disrespected or like upset about a comment that's made towards you. I think it's very important to speak up. Then it makes people know that, oh, that it's not okay to like say this or that. And yeah, and if I had to make a recommendation on how to stop prejudice or hate in this world, I would say it starts from young people, of course, but also the old generation, making sure that you do not teach younger generations about those types of comments or like prejudice against a group of people, and just making sure to educate everyone about it, which is what we do at the Inclusivity Panel. It's a brand new club, but we've been able to advocate for announcements to be made in English and Spanish in school. We discussed ways to make our school a more inclusive space. We surveyed people in our school if they feel like they belong, if they feel safe, and if they feel welcome. And currently we're researching ways to change that everyone feels included in our school. And that's what I have to say.
I only got the chance to talk to Christiana for about 5 or 7 minutes before the event started tonight, but it was immediately apparent how much courage she has. I mentioned to her that so few students take the opportunity to travel and go away a little bit further than an hour or two away from our area to go to college. And she's off to North Carolina, of course. But we very quickly concluded that this is nothing compared to moving here from Nigeria. This is nothing, right? So she obviously, you can see the courage that she has, and we know that she'll be successful. Our next guest needs not much in the way of introduction. The mayor of Lynn, Jared Nicholson, and Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Attorney Carrigan for organizing this panel. Thank you to the Greater Lynn Bar Association for really targeting the concerning rise in anti-Semitism and broadening that conversation, and really thank all of you for being here this evening. It's an honor to be here on behalf of the City of Lynn, and given the prejudice that unfortunately does exist in our community, I wanted to be here as mayor to show my support to the people who are fighting to defeat it. And while I aim to be an active supporter in that work, I also want to acknowledge that as a straight white man, it's not something that I personally experience. And that makes it all the more important for me to listen and learn from people that do. And of course, I still have a role and a personal stake in wanting to dismantle prejudice, and its existence absolutely bothers me morally as an individual, and then also important because of my work, it creates an obligation for me as an elected official. The wide range of perspectives that we've heard this evening is so helpful to really comprehend the breadth of this issue and to personalize it through the stories of leaders in our community. So thank you so much to each of you for your remarkable words and your courage in sharing with everyone. We truly appreciate it. And while the breadth is helpful, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge and take that honest self-assessment as a community and as a society. And I think that means here in the City of Lynn, acknowledging, as many of the speakers have done tonight, that while some forms of prejudice are no longer rampant, unfortunately, some forms of prejudice dissipated in ways that fortified others. And the ways in which anti-blackness specifically have persisted from the beginning of the country through today, and the ways in which it's created systemic barriers is really important to highlight, particularly here in the City of Lynn, with the majority of our population identifying as people of color. I'm encouraged today to be surrounded by so many people who share this goal to dismantle these forms of prejudice that we discuss this evening. And given our city's proud history as a home for immigrants, I also want to point out that as we confront prejudice, the solution is embracing our differences, not in erasing them or ignoring them. And I think what's so special about our community is how we can unite in celebration, really, about what makes us unique, and celebrate our shared identity as Lynners, as well as people, and at the same time, celebrate the unique identities that are such a great source of pride and meaning for individuals in this community. Those moments where we are able to celebrate those unique identities are a great complement to harder moments like tonight, when we acknowledge and confront problems that we still struggle with. Both of those types of moments, I think, are necessary for us to move forward in this work. And so I want to thank you all again for creating this space and this forum tonight. Thank you.
So, whoa. Need a lawyer. Listen, we promised that this would end at 7, and we're going to keep our promise. We also said that we would open this up for questions. But what I'm going to do first is, anybody who wants to go, there's food down the bottom, or if you want to go home, you can do that. Or you can stay for questions, and we'd be happy to answer questions. Which pleasure. I thought everybody would get up. Judge. By the way, George, thank you for your generosity to Lynn people. No, Lynn's a great speaker.
What George is trying to say is that because Brothers Deli is very versatile, and George has served a lot of the
Yeah, okay. Anybody else?